Hercule Poirot and the Embrace That Left a Scar. Chapter 1. A Party Beneath the Surface. Lady Vernon's residence, nestled in the fragrant hills of Surrey, glowed with the splendour of an elite soirée. Paper lanterns swayed gently in the gardens, reflecting their light on the well-made-up faces of English high society. On the terrace, under a lace awning, champagne flowed, and polite laughter masked tensions that only attentive ears could perceive. To it, Honoria Vernon, widow of the late shipping magnate Sir Gregory Vernon, performed her role as hostess with the implacable grace of an uncrowned queen. No mistakes were allowed at her party. Every drink, every orchestra, every invitation had been planned with pinpoint precision. And yet, that evening, one flaw crept in. "Have you noticed Dr. Halberd?" Captain Lytton murmured discreetly to his companion, as they both watched from a corner of the room. "Not since you tried to convince me you know Flemish art," Lady Sylvia Norrington replied with a dry laugh. "You have the hands of someone who has lied too much." The object of her attention, Dr. Simon Halberd, a retired physician and former missionary to Africa, was chatting animatedly with Lady Vernon. His smile was broad, but his posture was anything but comfortable. He swirled his glass with tense fingers, as if waiting for something, or someone. It was around 11 o'clock when it happened. A short, dry scream came from the inner garden. The guests turned in unison. Lady Honoria paled before putting down her glass. They ran into the garden. In the middle of the rosebush, next to the stone bench under the wisteria, lay the body of a man. His white tuxedo was stained with blood across his chest. A small but precise wound, like a violent kiss. Lady Sylvia, seeing the corpse's face, took a step back and murmured, "My God, it's Ambrose." Silence swallowed the party. Ambrose Channon, Lady Honoria's former fiancé and silent partner in the Vernon and Lowe Shipping Company, was dead. No one moved. Only the grandfather clock in the hall continued to tick with punctual disdain. 2 days later, under a fine rain that seemed woven from crystal threads, a black car pulled up in front of the main gate of the Vernon estate. A small man with an impeccably waxed moustache and a dark continental-cut overcoat got out. His gait was short and measured, as if every step had been rehearsed beforehand. "Hercule Poirot," he announced in a musical accent, offering his card to the butler. "I have been invited by Lady Vernon. I understand there is a delicate situation." The butler, visibly disturbed, nodded respectfully. "Her lordship is waiting for you in the tea-room, monsieur. She hasn't left the West Wing since the incident." Poirot moved forward slowly, inspecting every frame, every carpet, every flower in the vases, as if talking to the house itself. Lady Honoria greeted him, dressed in black, without a tear on her face. Her voice was firm, but her hands, those hands that had once caressed the strings of a harp, remained twisting in her lap. "Monsieur Poirot, I don't want a scandal. I want to know why anyone would want to kill Ambrose. Here, in my home." "Then, madame," said Poirot with a slight bow, "it will be necessary to know everyone present that evening, because where there is a crime, there is always a psychology that precedes it." "And the police?" she asked, pressing her lips together. "Oh, the police think it was a botched robbery. That Ambrose surprised someone in the garden. But I don't believe that. Do you want to know why?" She nodded, almost fearfully. Poirot took a small handkerchief from the inside pocket of his coat. In its centre, carefully folded, was a withered flower, because this white orchid was found in the lapel of his jacket, and no one wears a white orchid to a party, unless they're hoping to reconcile with an old love. Lady Honoria paled, and in her eyes appeared something that wasn't exactly sadness, or guilt, but an old wound that it seemed never fully healed. Poirot leaned forward and said softly, "Madam, what begins as a hug can end with a scar, and in this house I suspect many bear both." Chapter 2. Echoes of a Broken Love. The dining room at Vernon House, the day after Poirot's arrival, offered a disturbing contrast to the tense atmosphere. The sun filtered its rays through the high windows, gently illuminating a room where the chairs still held the echo of an interrupted party. At the head of the table, Lady Honoria poured tea with automatic movements, like an actress repeating her role in a play she no longer understood. Poirot, his fingers interlaced and his eyes closed for a moment, seemed to be meditating more than waiting. Then he opened his eyes. "How many guests were there exactly at your party, madam?" 15 in total, 7 men, 8 women," Lady Honoria answered without hesitation. "Almost all from our usual circle. Although, of course, Ambrose hadn't been to this house for over 5 years. "And he was invited by you?" She paused. "No. I received a letter from him that very morning. He said he came to apologize for everything that had happened, that he wanted to make amends for certain things, and that he wanted to talk privately." Poirot nodded slightly. "A reconciliation on a night of celebration. Very symbolic. But tell me, did anyone present know you were coming?" "I didn't mention it to anyone," Honoria said, her voice strained. "I thought if I did, there would be murmurings, and I didn't want that. It was a mistake." "Perhaps," murmured Poirot, "but mistakes are often more revealing than premeditated acts, n'est-ce pas?" Poirot spent the rest of the day examining the inner garden. He walked among the rose bushes, observed the statues, and measured the distance between the bench where Ambrose lay and the windows of the house. There were no traces of blood on the ground, but his eyes fell on a tiny detail, a barely indented footprint next to the gravel path, smaller than a standard man's shoe. He bent down and used his cane to point out the outline. "Someone came out here not intending to leave a trace, but they failed, and whoever leaves a trace when they don't mean to reveals something about their soul," he said in a low voice. At the house, he was led to the library, where Captain Edgar Lytton, an old friend of the late Sir Gregory, and one of the partygoers, was waiting. "So you're the famous Belgian detective?" the captain asked, adjusting his cane impatiently. "I suppose you've come to seek the truth behind this tragedy. Although it's clear to me, Ambrose had enemies everywhere." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You saying this with knowledge of the facts, or with a desire to close the matter quickly?" The captain snorted. "Ambrose was a climber, a hypocrite. He manipulated everyone with that smile of his. When his affair with Honoria ended, he left behind a collection of rumours and wounds. Even after Gregory passed away, No one wanted him here. And yet he came back. Are you relieved by his death, Captain? The man frowned. Are you insinuating something? No, monsieur, said Poirot with a courteous smile. I merely observe how disordered emotions tend to reveal more than words. Later, Poirot met with Miss Daphne Channon, the deceased's niece, a young painter with an independent spirit, a red lock of hair escaping from her messy bun. Her sadness was genuine, but her expression was a mixture of resentment and relief. Ambrose wasn't a good man, Monsieur Poirot, she said bluntly. He was charismatic, yes, but never sincere. He played with people's affections as if they were colours on a palette. Even with me, he said I was the only person who understood him. But he said that to many. And you loved him, mademoiselle? She looked down. No, not in the end, but once, yes. Although later I saw it for what it was. Did he confide anything to you before he died? Daphne hesitated. I got a note from him the day before the party. He asked me to help him fix things with Honoria. He said he wanted to close a chapter. And you? Did you accept? I told him I didn't want to be part of his romantic dramas, that it was too late for that. Poirot nodded slowly. He took his hat, but before leaving he asked, Do you remember what Ambrose was wearing that night? Yes, with a white tuxedo and an orchid in the lapel, as if he were going to an opera or a confession. Poirot stopped dead in his tracks. Thank you, mademoiselle. You've said more than you imagine. That each evening Poirot dined alone in his room. He placed several notes on the table. The footprint in the garden, the white orchid, Honoria's sudden change of mood, Lytton's contradictions, and Daphne's barely veiled resentment. Her fingers played with the edge of the napkin ring as she murmured, Oh, crime committed with precision. But precision isn't coldness, it's disguised passion. Who, in this house, wanted Ambrose to die? And why on that bench, on that night? No, no! There are still emotions to unearth, and a wound that still festers beneath layers of elegance. He stood up, smoothed his coat, and turned on a dimmer lamp. The real investigation was just beginning. Chapter 3. The Waltz of Alibis. The next morning, Poirot went down to the conservatory of Vernon House, where the windows, fogged by the morning damp, let in a diffuse light, soft as a whispered secret. Lady Sylvia Norrington was waiting for him there, dressed in a lilac dress and wearing a narrow-brimmed hat that barely concealed her disdain. I thought you'd come looking for me eventually, Monsieur Poirot, he said, not bothering to hide a wry smile. You see everything, don't you? Even what one doesn't want to show. Poirot inclined his head. Only what I'm allowed to see, madam. But sometimes even the hidden insinuates itself. Lady Sylvia settled herself on a wicker divan, crossing her legs with studied elegance. Ambrose was a nuisance, she said, looking at her polished nails. A ghost from the past, many of us would rather forget. His return was inconvenient. Inconvenient for whom, exactly? She let out a short, mirthless laugh. For everyone. Except perhaps for Honoria, who was still pretending it didn't hurt. Poirot approached one of the plants, examining, without touching a red geranium that seemed out of place among the white orchids. Where were you when the murder occurred? In the library, with Dr. Halberd and Mr. Carswell. We were playing a game of bridge. They can confirm that. I didn't move from my chair until we heard the scream. And did you notice anything unusual in Ambrose's behaviour that night? Sylvia hesitated for a moment. He was nervous. He was drinking more than usual. And he was looking at Honoria as if he was afraid of something, but also as if he wanted to make one last impression. He was always dramatic. Poirot nodded slightly. Did you know Daphne Shannon? Of course. A talented and fragile creature, too much like her uncle for her own. Good. And Captain Lytton? A man from another century. He thinks honour is washed with whiskey and a veiled threat. Are you implying that he— I'm not implying anything, madam. I'm simply observing that each person has their own waltz. And that evening the pace quickened for many. Poirot then asked to speak to Dr. Simon Halberd. He found him in the back parlour, leafing through a copy of Tropical Medicine with the absent attention of someone who needs to feign occupation. Dr. Halberd, Poirot greeted him politely. I've come to bother you briefly. Of course, monsieur, though I'm afraid I can't offer you much. I was with Lady Sylvia and Mr. Carswell in the library. We were playing bridge. It was a dull evening until it turned tragic. Did you know Mr. Channon before? In name only, and by reputation, he added, adjusting his bow tie. We all knew he'd been close to Lady Honoria. It wasn't a secret, but she never mentioned it. His return was a shock. Poirot leaned forward. And the relationship between you and Lady Honoria? How would you describe it? The doctor cleared his throat. Cordial? Professional? Approachable, perhaps? I've been her personal physician since her husband's death. I appreciate her, but she's not what you imagine. And what do I imagine, Doctor? Halberd smiled awkwardly. I might have personal reasons for not wanting Ambrose back, but I don't. I'm not a jealous man, much less a violent one. Poirot stood up with a calm expression. Often, Doctor, people kill not out of hatred, but out of fear, and fear takes many forms. Jealousy, reputation, loss. Halberd remained silent as Poirot walked away. Outside the garden lay peaceful, but the detective knew that beneath that calm lay a turbulent truth. Later, in the late Sir Gregory's private office, Poirot met with Mr. James Carswell, a financial partner of the Vernon family. Middle-aged, with an angular face and grey eyes, Carswell seemed more comfortable among financial statements than among people. I didn't like Channon, he said bluntly. He was reckless, charming and dangerous. A lethal combination for business. He had shady dealings with several partners before disappearing. And why did he come back? I don't know. Maybe he needed money, or redemption, or both. But this house wasn't supposed to be the setting for that. Were you playing bridge with Lady Sylvia and Dr. Halberd during the crime? Yes, although Dr. Halberd was away briefly, if I remember correctly. He said he needed air. He came back a few minutes later. Poirot frowned. Interesting. He didn't mention that. I'm not surprised, Carswell replied. Sometimes you want to forget the details that put you near an awkward scene. Poirot remained silent, but in his mind the pieces began to fall into place with greater precision. A dead man with a symbolic flower. A pre-party note. intersecting suspects with broken histories and rusty loyalties. And now, a contradiction. "Thank you, monsieur," Poirot said finally. "That was enlightening." That night, while jotting down his thoughts, Poirot wrote 3 names and 1 word under each. Lady Sylvia, cynicism. Dr. Halbert, omission. James Carswell, precision, and, as a title at the top of the sheet, an elegant lie in a messy dance. Chapter 4. A Rose in the Storm. Evening fell upon Vernham House with an almost liturgical solemnity. Clouds gathered over the Surrey hills, and a thick air, heavy with unfulfilled promises, seeped through the cracks in the mansion. Poirot, always attentive to the signs of both the soul and the weather, thought it the perfect moment to visit the woman who until now had remained studiously on the sidelines. The house's French governess, Mademoiselle Elise Fournier. Elisa had been hired by Lady Honoria to tutor her great-niece, young Celia, who had left the scene after the murder. Celia wasn't present at the party, but her governess was, and that was enough to pique Poirot's curiosity. The other study where she received him was a modest space filled with French books, portraits of 19th-century authors, and a faint scent of lavender. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said politely, "I beg your patience. I know you were not at the centre of the evening, but it is often the minor details that open closed doors." "Monsieur Poirot," Elise replied with a wistful smile, "closed doors have always been my specialty. Secrets aren't shouted, they're taught between the lines." His accent was subtle, his gestures measured, but his dark eyes shone with an intelligence that Poirot immediately appreciated. "Where were you when the scream was heard?" "On the upstairs gallery, reading. I'd left Miss Celia asleep early. She had no interest in the party, and neither did I." "And did you hear anything before the scream?" Elise hesitated. "Yes, hurried footsteps. A shadow passed across the landing. I can't swear to who it was. They were heading toward the stairs leading to the garden. Maybe someone who didn't want to be seen coming down the main hallway." Poirot raised his eyebrows. A male or female figure, rather petite, though she was wearing a long coat. It could have been anyone. But there was something about her gait. She wasn't running away. She was walking with purpose. Poirot paused. "Did you know Mr. Channon?" "Only by sight, and from whispers. Everyone here has opinions about everyone else, even without proof. They called him charming and despicable in the same breath. And Miss Daphne, she's not as fragile as she seems. I've seen her break paintbrushes when something doesn't go right. Her passion is as dangerous as her sadness." Poirot said goodbye gratefully, but before leaving he noticed a small vase with a single fresh red rose. A curious choice among so much grey. Elise shrugged. "Flowers also know how to remain silent, monsieur, but sometimes they shout louder than words." Upon returning to the main hall, Poirot met Lady Honoria, who informed him that Inspector Creighton would be calling again that evening to formalise the final police reports. Poirot asked her for a copy of the guest list with the approximate times they had left. Some were still in the house, others had left the following day. Lady Honoria added, in a low voice, "I don't think any of them came to kill him, Monsieur Poirot, but I do think someone was afraid of what Ambrose was going to say." "Were you afraid too?" She looked at him, not surprised by the question. "Of course. We all fear the return of the dead we thought were buried." Poirot nodded gravely. That evening, after dinner, the drawing-room became a place of questioning rather than relaxation. Inspector Creighton arrived punctually, accompanied by an officer carrying documents, but he was receptive to Poirot's observations. "I've been told you doubt the failed robbery hypothesis," said the inspector. "I completely rule it out," Poirot replied. "No one steals with suede gloves and leaves a flower of reconciliation in their victim's lapel. This crime was deeply personal." Creighton watched him with interest. And then, it was a warning, a carefully symbolic act. The killer didn't just want to silence Ambrose. He wanted Honoria, and perhaps others, to understand something. A message. What kind of message? That the past isn't erased without consequences. That a hug can hurt more than a bullet. And that, sometimes the wound, is shared. Creighton silently noted. Poirot, retiring to his rooms, passed once more by the vase of white roses in the corridor. But one of them wasn't white. It was red, stopped. His gaze hardened slightly. "A flower among equals," he murmured. "Or a sign. There's someone who wants to be seen, but only by me." He returned to his desk, took a blank sheet of paper, and wrote a name in capital letters. Dawn, it wasn't. A person. It was a moment. Dawn, the only time when liars become truthful, unintentionally. Chapter 5. The Hour of Naked Faces. That morning, as Vernon House slept in a viscous silence, Poirot rose from his desk. He hadn't slept, nor did he intend to. The word he had written, dawn, it wasn't a cipher, but a reminder. Dawn revealed what the night had hidden. Nerves loosened, masks fell away, and faces, even the most refined, revealed cracks that daylight didn't forgive. It was 5:17 a.m. when she descended into the east wing, wearing a pearl-grey silk robe and slippers perfectly aligned with her body. There was no specific destination, only one certainty. He who lies while asleep contradicts himself when he wakes up. As he passed the dining room, he heard a sound. A slight, almost imperceptible rustle. He stopped. The door wasn't completely closed. He pushed gently. Inside, Captain Edgar Lytton's silhouette loomed against the window. Dressed in pyjama pants and a wrinkled house jacket, he held a half-empty glass of whiskey without ice. "I didn't expect company at this hour, Monsieur Poirot," he said without turning around. "And I didn't expect to find a veteran soldier fleeing from sleep." Lytton took a sip before speaking. "Sleep is for those who have not made mistakes." Poirot sat down without permission on one of the padded chairs by the table. "Are you haunted by the memory of Ambrose, or by your own?" The captain smiled with a brief bitterness. Ambrose was a charming bastard, but he was also necessary. He reminded us that we're all pretending, that even in the best houses you pay a price for belonging. What price did you pay? The one about obedience. Greg and I founded this house on a tacit agreement. He controlled the fortune. I controlled the loyalty. Then Ambrose came, and Honoria changed. Do you think Lady Honoria still loved him? Oh, I don't think she ever stopped hating him for having loved her badly," said Lytton, turning at last. "And that, Monsieur Poirot, is more dangerous than love itself. At dawn, Poirot walked toward the greenhouses. There he found Daphne Shannon, sitting on a rusty iron bench. She was wearing a fine dressing gown and holding a sketchbook in her hands. "Do you always draw at dawn, mademoiselle?" She turned her head with a start that betrayed her insomnia. "No, only when thoughts haunt me." "And what are your thoughts this morning?" She closed the notebook. "My uncle wasn't a good person, but he didn't deserve to die like that. No one does." "Are you sure of that?" Poirot said gently. "There are those who think some deaths are a balance, an unspoken justice." "Then you should have the courage to sign it," Daphne replied with unexpected harshness. Poirot sat down next to him. "Mademoiselle, would you mind showing me your drawings?" She hesitated. Then she held out the notebook. Landscapes, portraits, abstract shapes. But what caught Poirot's eye was the last one. A face, Ambrose's, distorted by a black shadow that covered half of his face. "Did you draw it before or after the party?" "Later," he replied, lowering his voice. "It's not real. It's how I remember it. Half true, half something that makes me shudder." "And what is that shadow?" The Poirot carefully closed the notebook. "Mademoiselle, there are wounds that open when one forces oneself to look within. But you are learning to look. That's more than many here can say." During breakfast, Inspector Creighton approached Poirot with a file under his arm. The coroner confirmed the wound was caused by a thin, sharp object, not a kitchen knife, something more elegant, perhaps a long needle or a stiletto. "But the weapon hasn't been found." Poirot nodded, as if he already knew. "Any other news?" "Yes. The toxicology report shows traces of a mild sedative in Ambrose's system. Nothing that would kill him, but enough to make him vulnerable. Someone wanted to make sure he didn't resist. So now we know 3 things. It was a premeditated symbolic murder, executed with almost clinical precision." Creighton looked at him sideways. "And what exactly are you looking for?" "An invisible scar," Poirot replied, "because this crime didn't begin with a flower, nor did it end with a stab. It began long before that, in someone's soul, and that wound still bleeds. We just have to find where." That night, Poirot locked himself in his room again. He took 3 objects out of his suitcase: a magnifying glass, a small paper rose, and an antique tie pin with a green stone. He lined them up and looked at them like chess pieces. Then he muttered, "A flower isn't plucked without intention. Poison isn't given without reason. And a wound isn't opened without a history." His eyes sparkled, and I'm already beginning to see the story. Chapter 6. What the Hands Don't Say. The next morning, Poirot decided it was time to look beyond words. Words, he thought, can conceal. Gestures never. It was then that he asked Lady Honoria to organise an informal breakfast with everyone still in the house. Captain Lytton, Lady Sylvia, Dr. Halberd, James Carswell, and young Daphne Channon. Lady Honoria, although visibly fatigued, agreed. Breakfast was served in the back garden, under the wisteria pergola. The atmosphere was forcedly relaxed. Small talk floated like soap bubbles, unstable, empty, and ready to burst. Poirot didn't eat. He watched. every movement, every averted glance, every cup that trembled slightly as it rested on its saucer. In particular, he noticed something curious. Everyone sat as if they already knew their place, except Daphne. She sat in the far corner, almost on the sidelines, as if she didn't want to be there. "And how did you sleep, Captain?" asked Poirot suddenly. "Like a soldier who doesn't expect battle, monsieur," Lytton replied with a dry smile. "And you, Lady Sylvia?" "I dreamed about masks," she said, sipping her tea without looking at him. "And how easily they break once you touch them intentionally." "Interesting," Poirot murmured, "because I dreamed about a needle, long, thin, like the kind they use to hold flowers, or hearts." The silence was immediate. Only the song of a blackbird dared to break it. Poirot continued with absolute kindness. "We already know that Mr. E. Channon was mildly poisoned before being killed, that his body showed no signs of a struggle, that someone made sure he couldn't scream." Lady Honoria, pale, dropped her knife. "Why would anyone want to murder a man who only came to—" "Redeem yourself?" Poirot interrupted gently. "Or confess?" No one responded. Daphne gripped the edge of her plate. Carswell choked slightly on his coffee. Poirot stood up. "I propose something curious, my friends. Let's imagine that Ambrose Channon didn't come out of love, but out of threat. That someone at this table knew his return would entail personal risk. What do you do with a man who threatens to spill the beans?" "He is dissuaded," Halbert muttered. "Or is it eliminated?" Poirot added coldly. After breakfast, Poirot walked with Inspector Creighton through the south wing. "Well?" the policeman asked. "Do you think we'll get the better of him?" One of them made a mistake. A tiny mistake, but enough. "Which?" "Their hands," Poirot replied. "Miss Daphne's." Creighton frowned. "What do they have?" During the entire breakfast, he didn't touch his cup once. Not his roll, not his cutlery. He pretended to eat, but avoided any action that required coordination. You saying that? That her hands are shaking? Not from guilt, but from the weight of silence." Creighton remained thoughtful. "And you think he killed his own uncle?" Poirot shook his head gently. "No, but he knows who did it, and he's struggling between telling them or protecting them." That afternoon, Poirot found Daphne on the upstairs gallery, standing in front of a blank canvas. "Mademoiselle," he said calmly, "may I speak to you as if you weren't a detective?" She turned around, her eyes red. "I don't think I know how to be anything else. It's possible, but I'll try." He sat down next to her. "I know you didn't kill Ambrose, but I also know that that night someone used your fears as a weapon, someone you love, someone who perhaps justified their act as protection." Daphne broke into a long sigh, as if she had been holding her breath for days. "I didn't want him to die, just to be quiet. And what was I going to say?" She looked at him, defeated, that I wasn't his niece, but his daughter, that my existence was a disgrace to him. He was going to tell Lady Honoria everything. He said it would hurt her where it hurt the most. Poirot closed his eyes. The puzzle fell into place. "And you told someone else," Daphne nodded slowly. "To the one who always protected me. To the one who told me Don't worry, I'll stop him." And that person didn't understand that I just wanted him to go away, not to die. "Who, Daphne?" She whispered a name. Poirot didn't reply. He just stood up and said tenderly, "Thank you. Sometimes the truth is also an act of love." That evening, Poirot strode briskly down to Lady Honoria's office. He carried with him a small box, an old letter, and the name that had been whispered to him. There was no judgment in his gaze, only determination. The time has come to reveal what was truly broken that night. It wasn't just a heart. It was the illusion that the past can be buried without consequences. Chapter 7. The Name Behind the Silence. Lady Honoria's office was a relic of a bygone era. Walnut bookcases, heavy curtains that absorbed the light, and a fireplace that, though extinguished, still smelled of old ashes. Poirot stood by the closed window. In his hands rested a finely inlaid box and a letter bearing the sealed seal of the Vernon and Lowe Shipping Company. Lady Honoria, sitting at her desk, watched him with a mixture of tiredness and distrust. "What's in that box, Monsieur Poirot?" "Chun, past, madam," he replied, slowly placing it on the table. "And also the key to understanding the night Ambrose Channon died." She maintained her composure, but her perfectly manicured hands tightened on the back of her chair. "I've endured more than you can imagine, monsieur, and I don't need to open any more wounds. But it's already open, madam. You just haven't looked at it yet." Poirot offered her the letter. Honoria took it and opened it delicately, as if afraid the paper would cut her. She read it silently. Then, once more. Her face grew pale, without tears, but with an intensity that spoke of deep-rooted grief. "This is Ambrose's letter," she said, more to herself than to Poirot. "He confesses that Daphne is his daughter, that he made mistakes, that the time had come to tell them, that I deserved to know. And he was planning to do it in the middle of a party? No, I was going to tell him later, but I never got around to it. Someone stopped me." Honoria raised her eyes. "Daphne? No." Daphne wanted silence, not blood. It was someone else who acted out of protection. Honoria closed her eyelids and rested her forehead on the letter for a few seconds. When she spoke again, her voice was different, lower, more fragile. "It was Simon, wasn't it?" Dr. Halberd Poirot didn't reply immediately. He simply opened the box and took out a small object, a long polished bone hairpin stained at the tip, a stiletto disguised as a hair ornament. It was found in the planter near the hedge. Subtle, light, deadly, used by someone who knew just where to strike without leaving a scream. And more importantly, by someone accustomed to handling instruments with precision. "A doctor," Honoria said. "Yes, but not out of vocation, but out of devotion." She nodded very slowly. Her eyes showed no surprise. "He hinted at it to me years ago, that he'd do anything to protect my name. I took it as a compliment, not a warning." Poirot sat down slowly. "Dr. Halberd deduced that Ambrose was going to humiliate you, that he was going to destroy the facade of respect you had maintained after your husband's death. He thought he was doing it out of love. But he acted out of possession. Where is he now? In his room. He doesn't know I know yet, but he suspects I'm coming. Honoria stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the garden. What will happen to Daphne? That's up to you. She didn't know. She only spoke out of desperation, out of fear of losing what little balance she'd achieved. The lady nodded slowly. She's not guilty of her origins, but the price of that origin she paid alone. Poirot stood up. Madam, I ask one last favour. Gather everyone's in the drawing room tonight, as you did the night of the party. This time not to toast, but to listen. And what are you going to say? Poirot smiled briefly. Just the truth, nothing more, but nothing less. That evening, the atmosphere was different. Everyone present felt it upon entering the room. Daphne, her lips trembling. Lady Sylvia, feigning indifference. Captain Lytton, taciturn. Carswell, restless. And Dr. Halberd, standing by the piano, with a calm that seemed affected. Poirot stood by the unlit fireplace. He smoothed his moustache. He looked at each person carefully, and then he began. Mr. Ambrose Channon's death wasn't a crime of passion or a botched robbery. It was an act of restraint. Someone wanted to prevent the truth from coming to light, but the truth always finds a way. There was a slight creaking of wood. Someone shifted in their chair. That truth, Poirot continued, was that Daphne Channon wasn't simply a niece. She was Ambrose's illegitimate daughter, the fruit of a relationship he denied and concealed. Upon his return, he intended to use that secret as a weapon, not for reconciliation, but for destruction. Dr. Halberd tensed. Poirot looked at him. And you, Doctor, thought you would save Lady Honoria from humiliation. But you don't harm yourself to protect. You don't kill yourself for love. A frozen silence filled the room. The doctor didn't respond. He just lowered his gaze. And in that gesture, he confirmed everything. Poirot took a step back. Now, it's up to justice to take its course. But remember, everyone, it wasn't the truth that killed Ambrose, but the fear of it. Lady Honoria didn't cry. She just walked over to Daphne and took her hand. That was the only possible redemption. Chapter 8. A Confessional Without Walls. Hours after the revelation in the parlour, the Vernon mansion hadn't recovered its rhythm. The atmosphere, if possible, was thicker, as if the air had been filled with what had never been said. The hallways were silent, the rooms closed. No one dared to speak. Only the floorboards creaked, as if every step was a reminder of what had been broken. Poirot remained in the library. Opposite him, Dr. Simon Halberd sat in a high-backed armchair, his hands folded, his eyes fixed on a distant figure. "Are the police coming yet?" the doctor asked without turning his head. "On my way," Poirot replied neutrally. "But that's not what's bothering you, is it?" Halberd gave a withered smile. "I'm worried that Honoria won't understand what I did." "Ah, but you've understood now, although not in the way you expected. The question is, do you understand it?" A long silence. "I loved him," Halberd said finally. "Not as a young lady loves him, with unbridled passion, but with a devotion built day by day. After Gregory's death, I was his rock, his confidant. I believed that, perhaps one day—" "What would be something else?" The doctor nodded slightly, and then he came back. Ambrose, like a ghost, with his usual smile, with that power to bend wills. I couldn't stand it. Poirot approached slowly. You didn't kill him to protect Lady Honoria. You did it to protect the illusion that she needed you. I didn't want him to suffer again. And wasn't that precisely what he achieved? Halberd fell silent. His silence was a confession without applause. I made sure he was alone. I offered him a drink before dinner, something light, just to stun him. Then, when he went down to the garden, I followed him. He had the hairpin in his pocket, a gift from my mother. Ironies. Did you know where to hit? Of course, I studied anatomy before surgery. I knew how to stop her from screaming. It was quick. Poirot closed his eyes for a moment. And did you feel better? No, I felt empty, as if I had knocked down a statue that was already in ruins. That afternoon, when Inspector Creighton arrived with 2 officers, Halberd offered no resistance. He didn't say a word. He allowed himself to be handcuffed with the same expression a man wears when entering the operating room. Knowing the pain is already inside, and all that remains is to open it. In the hall, Lady Honoria watched him being led away. She didn't cry. She just kept her back straight, like a figure carved in marble. Poirot approached him. He wasn't a monster, madam. Just a man who mistook surrender for the right to possess. And I was his altar, she murmured. Poirot did not reply. Later, in the study, Poirot found Daphne standing in front of her uncle's unfinished painting. The portrait was still distorted, but this time there was a new layer of paint in the background, a trace of light that seemed to break the shadow. "Aren't you planning to destroy it?" asked Poirot gently. "No," Daphne replied. "It's a part of me, even if it hurts. I'd rather let him talk, even if it hurts." Poirot smiled slightly. "That's the beginning of healing, mademoiselle. Not hiding what was, but allowing it to be without controlling it." She looked at him with reserved tenderness. "How are you, Mr. Poirot? Tomorrow. Wisteria doesn't bloom for those who stay too long." That night in his room, Poirot wrote a letter. Not for the police or a superior officer. It was for himself. An old custom, a way of recording what wasn't said out loud. The killer wasn't an evil man, but he was dangerously in love. The victim wasn't innocent, but she didn't deserve to die either. The truth didn't save everyone, but at least it prevented the pain from continuing. And so, once again, the little grey cells found not only the culprit, but also those who still needed to be heard. He signed with his initial. He kept the letter, and as he turned off the lamp, he murmured, "Justice is a mirror, but the reflection is always human." Chapter 9. The Inheritances of Silence. At dawn, the Vernham house was finally truly still. Not the tense calm that precedes disaster, but a kind of deep repose, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. The rooms were emptier. Some guests had left during the night. Others, like Daphne, remained, but no longer with the urgency of fear, but with the introspection of someone beginning to see the landscape after a storm. Poirot descended the stairs in his impeccable light grey suit, his moustache polished, his carry-on suitcase in his right hand, and a decorative walking stick in his left. He wasn't leaving yet. but he already carried with him that subtle aura of farewell, as if part of his mind was already on the next case, the next crime yet to be committed. Lady Honoria was waiting for him in the blue drawing-room, accompanied by a figure who until now had been nothing more than a murmur. Young Celia, his great niece, with a pale face and eyes stunned by reality. She sat next to her aunt, a blank notebook on her knees. "Monsieur Poirot," Honoria said, her tone seeming to have softened since the previous evening. "Before you go, there is something else." Poirot bowed politely. "There's always something more, madame. It's human nature." Honoria held out a thin, dark green leather folder. Inside were legal documents, old wills, and Vernon and Lowe shipping clauses. Gregory had made changes to his will shortly before his death. He wanted to leave a portion of his fortune to someone who, he said, had been silenced for too long. Poirot leafed through the pages carefully, without speaking. Then he raised his eyes. "Daphne." "Yes," Honoria said. "Gregory knew before me. He discovered it by accident. He wouldn't tell me until he was sure. When he died, I found out from reading this." Poirot closed the folder and left it on the table. "And yet, madame, you kept the secret. Why?" "Because I thought he did it out of kindness. Now, I know he did it out of mercy. Maybe both." Poirot turned to Celia. "And you, mademoiselle, what do you think about all this?" The young woman looked at him with an expression still in formation. "I grew up surrounded by secrets. Now I know that silence didn't protect me. Only kept me ignorant. I prefer to know, even if it hurts." Poirot nodded respectfully. An admirable attitude, very rare among young people. Mid-morning, Daphne asked to speak with Poirot alone. She found him in the garden, next to the stone bench, where Ambrose had been murdered, the same bench, now unmarked but steeped in. "History! I'm going to leave," she said bluntly. "To Paris. My mother was born there. I want to understand her, and start over." "And the painting?" asked Poirot. "I'll take it with me. I'll finish it when I can look into your face without fear." Poirot looked at the sky. There was a light breeze, as if even the wind knew when to move carefully. "Have you spoken to Lady Honoria?" "This morning." It was strange, as if we'd both switched to another language, not one of reproach, but one of recognition. Poirot turned to her. "You won't just inherit a fortune, mademoiselle. You'll inherit a history, with contradictions, with scars. Be worthy of it." Daphne looked into his eyes. "I'll try." Before leaving the house, Poirot made one last visit to the study. There, on the mantelpiece, rested a portrait of Sir Gregory. Beside it, a younger portrait of Lady Honoria. And between them, a small ivory figure, an angel with a broken wing. Poirot watched her for several seconds. Then he whispered, "Funny, it's always the broken angels who protect most fervently." He turned, crossed the threshold, and without looking back, said goodbye to the Vernon house. On the train back to London, Poirot sat by the window. He took out his notebook, the one he never showed to anyone, and wrote, "Crime isn't always born of hatred. Sometimes it's born of an excess of misguided love. In the Vernon house, no one won completely, but some lost less. Justice, as always, is imperfect, but sufficient." He closed the notebook he adjusted his hat. And as the train rolled along through the green fields of England, Hercule Poirot calmly closed his eyes, leaving behind a crime, a confession, and a wound that, like the title itself, had begun with a hug and ended with a scar. Chapter 10. The Scar That Was Never Seen. The day Poirot returned to London wasn't remarkable for its weather or its landscape. Yet for him it carried a distinct weight. In the peace that routine offers after a solved crime, there was also a feeling of unease. The feeling that something hadn't been fully revealed. Not a fact, but an emotion, a wordless truth, hidden between gestures and silences. Mr. Edward Catchpole, Poirot's regular secretary when Hastings was unavailable, received him at his apartment in Whitehaven Mansions. "How did your investigation in Surrey go, monsieur?" she asked, helping him hang up his coat. "With the usual complications, mon ami," Poirot replied. "A crime with flourish, a killer with unclear motivations, and in the end, a broken soul looking for redemption in the wrong place." "And was justice done?" Poirot stopped. Then he walked to his desk and sat down. "Justice, Mr. Catchpole, rarely lives up to our expectations. It was served, yes, but not restorative. Someone was arrested, but others will continue to live with their own sentences." The next day Poirot received a letter written in violet ink, with elegant handwriting and a light floral fragrance. "Mr. Poirot, I'm writing to you from Calais. I'm embarking for Paris tonight. In my luggage is the unfinished portrait, and along with it a new blank canvas. I don't know what I'll paint yet, but I want whatever comes next to be not a reflection of pain, but of what I learned from it. Thank you for not judging me, for listening when no one else would listen. Paris may not have answers, but it has light, and I need light. Daphne." Poirot folded the letter carefully and placed it in his personal folder. Then he took out a newspaper, clipping from the previous day, already marked with a pencil line. "Dr. Simon Halberd, formally charged with the murder of Ambrose Channon. Trial expected to begin in 3 weeks." His eyes scanned the line without emotion. He was a man who loved deeply. "But with restrained violence," she murmured. "Sometimes misdirected love becomes more dangerous than hate." That afternoon she received an unexpected visitor, Captain Edgar Lytton, still elegant though visibly older. His cane now rested more firmly on his shoulders, as if the weight of his conscience weighed heavily on him. "I've come to deliver something to you, Poirot," he said hoarsely. He took out a small wooden box and placed it on the table. Inside was a letter in Ambrose Channon's own handwriting. "She entrusted it to me weeks before the party," he explained. "She asked me to give it to Honoria, only if something happened to her. But when I saw the effect of her returning, I decided against it. I didn't want to add fuel to the fire." Poirot did not touch the letter. "And now? I think Honoria deserves to know everything, even what she didn't want to hear in life." Poirot nodded slowly. "You will deliver it yourself. Do you think he'll forgive me? I don't know. But if you want to be forgiven, you should start by not hiding any more." As night fell, Poirot went out for a walk. His steps led him, unintentionally, to Belgrave Square Gardens. There, among the freshly pruned bushes and lit lanterns, he sat down on an empty bench. He took out his notebook, a fountain pen, and began to write a reflection. Not all crimes are committed with weapons. Some are committed with silence, with omissions, with decisions made by others under the banner of protection. But the real mystery isn't in the murder, but in how we learn to live with what we can't change. He closed the notebook. He looked up at the sky. The clouds moved slowly, as if someone had finally decided to let the storm pass. And although he didn't say it out loud, Poirot thought, the hug that left a scar wasn't just between two people. It was between generations, between what is kept silent and what should never have been hidden. Chapter 11. The Weight of a Truth Told. Afternoon. 3 days after his return to London, Poirot received an unexpected note. It was written on diplomatic stationery, with the letterhead of the Belgian consulate in Mayfair. But what interested him wasn't the source, but the signature Lady Honoria Vernon. Mr. Poirot, allow me one last conversation, not about the crime, not even about the murderer. I want to talk about the aftermath, the echo that lingers when everything has been resolved, but nothing has been fully resolved. Come this afternoon if you can. Only you will be able to understand what I haven't yet said. With sincere esteem, Honoria Poirot didn't hesitate. At 5 o'clock, with mathematical punctuality, he arrived at a discreet residence in Kensington that had belonged to the Vernon family since before the war. Lady Honoria received him in a drawing-room that hadn't changed since the Edwardian era. Dark tapestries, portraits of ancestors with stern eyes, and a teapot discreetly steaming on the table. "Thank you for coming," she said, without formulas or smiles. Poirot inclined his head. "You are very generous to invite me, madam, after all this fuss. The commotion is over, but not the remorse." She sat opposite him. She was wearing mourning, though more sober than at her mansion in Surrey. It wasn't a dress of tragedy, but of discipline. "There's something I didn't say at the time," he continued. "Something that doesn't prove anything, but it does explain what wasn't seen." Poirot settled into his seat, carefully folding his hands. "I'm listening to you very carefully. When Gregory died, his will told me about Daphne. At first, I didn't accept it. It was an insult, one more stab in the back from Ambrose. But then I started to see something I didn't want to admit." "What did you see, madame?" "That I also had a responsibility. I was complicit in the silence of my husband, of the men in my circle, of all those who said, 'You don't say that.'" Poirot nodded slightly, without interrupting. "Ambrose's murder was just the final explosion of a truth that had been bottled up for years. And even though Halberd was the killer, we all contributed to the motive. A very lucid truth, madame. Few people have the courage to face it head-on. I don't know if it's bravery," she replied. "Maybe just tiredness." After tea, Poirot walked through the back garden, where they met again beside a small rose bush that was barely in bloom. "I've decided to give Daphne a property in the south of France," Honoria said. "A house near Arles. It's discreet, artistic, and far away, very far from all of this. And she knows. He'll find out this week. I don't want him to take it as a gift. It's an opportunity to rewrite something." Poirot looked at an unopened rose. He touched it with his gloved finger. Youth has the right to write its own ending, even when it's born from a prologue written by others. And you, Poirot, Honoria asked suddenly, have you never felt that, no matter how many crimes you solve, you can't repair the damage? He looked at her tenderly, constantly. But I also know that order, even partial, helps. It doesn't erase the pain, but it contains it. And sometimes that's enough for people to breathe again. Honoria closed her eyes for a moment, and then, as if each word took centuries, she said, Daphne isn't an inheritance from Ambrose. It's my choice now. Back at Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot sat by the fireplace, where a discreet flame crackled. He opened his leather notebook and wrote, The crime was solved. The killer was identified. And yet, the real miracle was something else. It wasn't about catching the culprit, but rather allowing those left behind to choose to stop inheriting other people's guilt. In a world of masks, Lady Honoria removed hers, not out of obligation, but out of justice. Late, yes, but it's never too late if the truth finds its voice. He closed his notebook. He poured himself a cup of herbal tea, and with the peace that only comes when justice has been served, though not in absolute terms, he murmured to himself, Scars are from the past, but choosing to show them is an act of the present. Chapter 12. The Art of the Last Word. A week after the investigation ended, London seemed to have returned to its usual rhythm. The sky, leaden as ever, watched indifferently over the cities. Goings-on. In his apartment in Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot meticulously organized his desk. It was a ritual that didn't respond to any urgent need, but to a deep conviction. External order brings internal clarity. On the desk lay a sealed envelope. It contained the complete transcript of his final report for the authorities, plus a private copy for his personal files. But before sealing it, Poirot added a handwritten note, written in his precise, tight hand. The crime wasn't committed impulsively. It was premeditated with icy logic, but executed with a warm heart. Simon Halberd wasn't a serial killer or an evil man. He was a faithful devotee of an image he had created for himself, that of a protector, and like so many before him, he confused devotion with propriety. Just as he placed the envelope in his file box, he heard a knock at the door. When he opened it, he found an unexpected figure standing before him, James Carswell, the financial partner of the defunct Vernon and Lowe Shipping Company. Monsieur Poirot, he said in a subdued voice, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I just wanted to thank you, in my own way. Come in, monsieur, said Poirot with a bow. Gratitude, when it is sincere, is never out of place. They sat opposite each other. Carswell seemed less rigid than in their previous encounters, as if an invisible burden had been lifted. I came because I found something in our archives, something that may close one last gap. It's a letter, an old one, written by Gregory Vernon, dated just weeks before his death. He handed him the paper. Poirot read it silently. The letter was brief, but revealing. Gregory spoke of Ambrose, not with anger, but with appreciation. He acknowledged Daphne's existence, not as a mistake on his friend's part, but as a responsibility they had both ignored for too long. If anything were to happen to me, I want Honoria and Daphne to find the truth, not a truth that's imposed on them, but one they can embrace as their own. Lies don't protect. They only delay the inevitable. Poirot closed his eyes, a line from the past illuminating the present. The inevitable had finally happened. Think. You, sir? She said, handing the letter back. It's comforting to know that even businessmen can think about the soul. Carswell blushed briefly. I've decided to close the shipping company, Poirot. What's left will be divided between Daphne and Charities. It's time for this family to stop accumulating invisible debts. That evening, Poirot walked to the Thames embankment, sheltered from the wind. He paused on one of the wrought iron benches and watched the city lights reflect in the dark waters of the river. The streetlights cast golden halos in the mist. The air smelled of coal, of history, of things that never quite end. He took a photograph out of his pocket. In it, Daphne, in an art studio in Paris, smiled shyly in front of a new canvas. He had received it that morning, along with a note that read simply, "I've started over, this time without a shadow." Poirot smiled. His satisfaction wasn't that of a man who has conquered crime, but rather that of one who has prevented a deeper injustice, wounds passing from one generation to the next without name or consolation. Nino, a low voice, as if speaking to the city itself, he said, "In the end it was a story of inheritances, not of money, but of emotions. And in that garden where a man fell with a flower in his lapel, the truth finally blossomed." He stayed a few more minutes, then stood up. He adjusted his hat, and with his tiny, orderly step, walked back home. On his desk, as he closed the last page of the case, he wrote, "End of the dossier. The hug that left a scar. Conclusion: the killer was Halbert. The motive: a mixture of protective love and fear of losing control. But the real protagonists were neither the victim nor the criminal, but the women caught in the middle. Honoria, who chose to face the pain. Daphne, who chose the light. And a scar that was finally seen, named and left behind." Poirot turned off the light, and in the darkness there remained only the peace of what was resolved.